I do not consent to being told that I am not taking a virus seriously simply because I question and challenge arbitrary laws that revoke my basic human rights. I do not consent to the tracking and tracing of any citizens, man and woman. And if we can easily track law-abiding citizens, then why haven't we made pedophiles and dangerous criminals a priority for this technology? I do not consent to limiting free speech under the guise of protecting people from the spread of misinformation. No government has a monopoly on information. I do not consent to the extreme censorship that is taking place on social media platforms toward doctors, scientists, political scientists, and activists who uphold data about possible differing outcome than the MSM would have us believe. This is modernized book burning and concerns me far more than the virus. What if your current beliefs are being chosen for you? I do not consent to closing down our wild spaces when the big box corporations and franchises, the liquor store and the dollar store are deemed essential. There is absolutely nothing more essential on this earth than earth itself. I do not consent to the closing of small businesses while multi-million-dollar companies remain open. This will and has undoubtedly contributed to rising rates of suicide, depression, drug and alcohol dependency, and domestic violence. I do not consent to being prevented from freely traveling while the politicians who impose these laws break them to visit their cottages or fly across borders. I do not consent to my tax dollars being used for bailouts on major corporations while heart-centered small business owners and their employees fall into poverty. I do not consent to being told that all these decisions are for my safety when people peacefully sitting on park benches are fined $1,300 for not social distancing, and convicted criminals and simultaneously released from prison for their own protection. I do not consent to violating the Commonwealth rights and freedoms which state that my body is sovereign and that no medical procedure can be mandated. I do not consent to mandatory vaccinations or forcible injections of any kind, period. I do not consent to the label anti-vaxxer, simply because I have concerns about mandatory, enforced vaccines or medical procedures, especially high-risk ones with limited testing that are deemed highly profitable to the most questionable of interests. I do not consent to being labeled a conspiracy theorist simply because I question certain government, corporate, and industrial motives. I do not consent to the amount of division and hatred that so many have fallen into between your fellow man simply for upholding opposing beliefs or for speaking openly about what they believe. A gentle reminder that you don't have to be unkind to someone just because you disagree with them or because you lead a different lifestyle with them. United we stand, divided we fall. I do not consent to the idea that pharmaceutical companies are the only way to prevent or heal from illness, and the outright dismissal of this side of the conversation is highly questionable from my perspective. I do not consent to the media only covering the death count when the survival rate is immensely higher. Fear cripples immunity. Why aren't we talking about both? I do not consent to forced testing or laws changing based upon statistics gathered from PCR testing. This testing is largely inaccurate, producing so many false positives that a suspicious president tested a fruit. It tested positive for the virus. I do not consent to the censorship of healthcare practitioners for educating on how to promote healthy immunity through lifestyle modification and the utilization of nutrients, herbs, and botanicals, which have served us for thousands of years. I do not consent to mad scientists and corporations who ignore the divine intelligence of our physiology in our earth. I do not consent to the lack of discussion on how the exploitation and destruction of our planet by the very powers in charge of handling our current crisis has increased illness globally. Everything from heart disease to depression, autoimmunity, cancer, and autism for decades. I do not consent. Do you? Here's what I do consent to. Being able to be a free and critical thinker who wants to share my views with others to prevent further suffering in the world without being silenced. A free man and a free woman are exactly that. Free. Recognize your freedom or recognize your slavery. I know which one I am. This comment was by this person, Somatic. Don't know them, have no affiliation with them whatsoever. Don't even know what their channel content has. I'll look at it afterwards. I'm only sharing this comment because I agree with this. And the fact that people completely dismiss this, that alone just shows how dumbed down human beings have become, how brainwashed and into this worldwide cult of scientism, how brainwashed they are to not even care if they're free or not.